We have a great program tonight that I'm very anxious to hear, but before that takes place, I need to tell you a few things that are coming up in the society. And I hope that everyone has time to look at the displays that are up here. The one on the far side is just things that are happening around the area and other historical societies. So there's a lot of things there on that one on the far side. And as usual, we have our suggestion box, the red box there, for anything that you want to think of programs coming up or things that you'd like to see us do or ventures you'd like to see us make. So you can put those in there. And there's also the forms to fill out for new members or to renew your membership. They're up there too. Members that your date is on your envelope, your expiration date, so that you can put in. Dues are $25 for individuals and $30 for family. And we're also always looking for donations for our historical society, the High School Historical Society Award that we present every year to a high school senior from Millbrook School. Jim in the back is glad to take any money that anybody would like to donate.
It's by far.
Once again, this year, we're planning on participating in the Memorial Day Parade, and we're going to have a tractor and wagon for anybody who doesn't want to walk and would like to ride. We need to meet up by Cardinal Hayes School by 9:45 at the very latest. So between 9:30 and 9:45, plan on being up there. And you can either walk behind our banner or you can ride on the wagon that the tractor will be pulling. The walkers don't have to pull. This year we have an additional meeting because we had to postpone our one for the golf and tennis club that was scheduled for April. That will now be June 16th. And at 7 p.m. at the Golf and Tennis Club. So you'll be hearing more about that. And our annual tea is tentatively scheduled for July 9th. That's going to be at Millbrook School, and we're going to be talking about the old mill that's there. And as usual, that is for members only, but you can join that day. So just look for these two announcements coming up in the near future. And now, Robert, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, sure. This is a non-historical society event, but I'm sure most of you know that this Saturday is the Millbrook Literary Festival, 8th annual. All day at the library, lots of events for every age, every interest. And if you want to schedule events here, these are hot off the presses. Raise your hand, I'll come around and give you one real quick. Anybody interested? Yes, have all these. There you go.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention more that we are mourning the death of John Thorne, and he was a great presenter for several programs. He wrote the book on the old homes of Millbrook, and he passed away the first part of April. And his memorial service was last weekend. It was great with the history of this village. Any other announcements anybody would like to make? Okay, then I would like to introduce our speaker for tonight, Ginna Sermier. I'm sorry. She, after retiring as an investment broker, she found her interest in horticulture and gardening. And I know that as my children grew up, I needed something to nurture, and I started nurturing plants for a long time too, but I found I couldn't nurture them in Millbrook soil very well. There's too much rock and shale, and so I kind of gave up, but she took it on and went on with it. She became, her interest, then she became a, wait a minute, all right, but her interest was much further, she took her interest much further than I did. She became a master gardener, and she just finished serving a 2-year term as president of the Millbrook Garden Club, and thus serving during their centennial year, and that's when she put these programs together, I heard. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ginny to you.
Thanks, Ivy. Being a lady in the garden club, we are often seen this way. This way we have on overalls and dirty clothes and our gardening, so I can dispense with this now that you know what we're all about. Before beginning, what I really need to do is apologize about my voice. So if you can't hear me, let me know and I will try to speak louder. But also before beginning, I want to offer my thanks to Lee Cornell for suggesting that I speak with you, and to Diane and the Millbrook Historical Society for the invitation. My gratitude also goes to Sally Cummings and to Edie Lonig, because they have been working on the archives and history of the Millbrook Garden Club for many years. To read all of the archives is fascinating. Many of these comments are taken from them. And Sally and Edie are longtime members who have made lasting contributions to the club and to the GCA. I'm going to move sequentially through the 100 years of the Millbrook Garden Club. So there are a lot of dates, a lot of numbers, but it's really the best way. And you are in historical society, so I'm assuming that's how you'd like to hear this. This evening I'm going to tell you about the origins of the Millbrook Garden Club, its context within the GCA, which is the Garden Club of America, and a bit about the Garden Club of America and the impact it has had on the world of gardening, horticulture, and conservation in America. The GCA, the umbrella organization of its individual gardening clubs, is comprised of 200 clubs and 18,000 members. It is also known as the GCA, and that's actually the way everyone does refer to it. The national headquarters are in New York City at 14 East 60th Street. And the Garden Club of America is divided into 12 zones. New York State is Zone 3, it has its own zone, and it extends from Cooperstown to East Hampton, all of Long Island, Rochester, Syracuse, and of course the town of the Woods. There are 23 clubs in our zone, and the most recent was added just last year, which is the West Hampton Garden Club in the Hamptons. It's actually very unusual for a garden club to be added. There were 199 garden clubs for quite a long time, so now there are 200. And actually, the Garden Club of America exists in 46 states and the capital, Washington, D.C. There are some states without garden clubs, and there are some states where, some zones where 5 or 6 states comprise just one zone, so in order to attend meetings, one has to fly or drive for 3 days. Although part of the GCA, clubs in general have great autonomy. Each zone has a meeting of the clubs in its zone each year, with the location rotating among the various clubs. The Millbrook Garden Club hosted a meeting in Salisbury, Connecticut in 2011, and this year the zone meeting will be in Syracuse and will be attended by Kathy De Las Heras, the current president, and Lee Cornell, the program chair. The Millbrook Garden Club is considered a seasonal club in that it meets 8 months of the year and does not meet in the winter. We are considered a small club, as some clubs, especially in Westchester and on Long Island, have many members, well over 100 members in some cases. The club is led by a president, executive committee, and board, which is comprised of committee chairs with and who meet several times each year. Currently, the MGC has 65 active members, plus 1 provisional, as well as honorary and affiliate members. Members reside in the Millbrook area as well as in Sharon, Lakeville, and Salisbury. In order to join the club, a person must be invited, and prospective members must be sponsored by several current members. The two primary events that we have are the biannual flower show and the biannual garden tour. And I'll tell you more about the garden tour later since it's next month. The mission statement for the Garden Club of America is, the purpose of the Garden Club of America is to stimulate the knowledge and love of gardening, to share the advantages of association by means of educational meetings, conferences, correspondence, and publications, and to restore, improve, and protect the quality of the environment through educational programs and action in the fields of conservation and civic improvement. The Millbrook Garden Club objectives are very similar, and there was a little bit more of a focus on civic involvement. When I first joined the club, my husband asked me, "What do you do besides flower arranging?" Well, little did he know. And actually, I don't do flower arranging, as you can tell. I just pop them in a vase. There are many committees in the club, and each member is encouraged to join several and to work actively. Among the committees are archives, awards, bulletin, civic projects, scholarship, conservation and national affairs, Dig This, which is our newsletter, finance committee, the finance committee, which no one wants to be on the finance committee, but the flower show, garden history and design, horticulture, hospitality, membership, nominating, photography, visiting gardens, and ways and means. During the course of the year, committees arrange for a program and speaker for their respective committees. Now you can imagine, there is really something for everyone here, but you can imagine with 65 members, how many committees members are on in order to hold these various committees. And people do work. In general, I think it's fair to say we have several members here with us tonight, and I think it's fair, they would agree that we work very hard and very hard. And people spend years and then take a little break. But in general, I think almost everyone participates fully. Now we'll go back in time to the history of the MGC. On November 3rd, 1913, Mrs. Keyes Winter held a meeting at her home where she, Mrs. Harry Flagler, Mrs. John Morgan Wing, and Miss Laura Edwards decided to form a garden club. At a subsequent meeting held at Mrs. Wing's house in Millbrook on January 26, 1914, the club was officially founded. Mr. Cornell, rector of Grace Church, presided. The goal, as stated in the Constitution, was to pursue horticultural interest and improvement. New members were to be proposed to the secretary in writing. One negative vote would disqualify an applicant from membership. Scary, right? 10 members and Mr. Cornell were at the first meeting. It was agreed that annual dues would be $5. At that meeting, a resolution was passed to put a notice in the Millbrook Roundtable advising of a lecture to be given in June at Memorial Hall, the Thorne building. Topic being trees and their care, admission 25 cents. It was well attended and considered a great success. The club's first flower show was also held that year in September 1914. This show was held in the YMCA, which had come to Millbrook the prior year and was located on Merritt Avenue.
Nice.
The following year, the flower show was held at Thorne Memorial Hall. The founding members of the club had as their aim, apart from gardening, an involvement in the wider community and an appreciation and preservation of the natural beauty of the area. The members' commitment to these goals was so firm and their enthusiasm so strong that in 1915, the club became a member of the Garden Club of America, making it one of the earliest clubs in the GCA. One of the Millbrook Garden Club's favorite stories is of Volmer Freeze. The first civic effort took place in 1915 and was a project involving children who were asked to collect the nests of tent caterpillars. A letter was sent to the estate owners asking for permission for the children to work on their estates to find the caterpillar tents. Supervision of the contest was left to the executive committee. The winner, a little boy named Volmer Fries, collected 12,800 cases. Runners-up were Edwin Strong with 10,000, and Charlotte Allen Most with 5,725. Now, I don't know who did the counting. I don't know how this worked. An amusing footnote to this story is that in the 1960s, one of the members was given a silver cup that had been found in an antique store in Connecticut that was inscribed Millbrook Garden Club. Further examination of the cup revealed that the name on the cup was that of the industrious little gentleman, Volmer Fries, who had collected 12,800 caterpillar cases. Thus, in 1914, and still in its first year, our club started a program which included both hort and conservation. This cup is now awarded by each president to a member who has done outstanding service to the club, and it currently resides with Betsy Sheikman. During the period of Mrs. Oakley Thorne's tenure as president of MGC, which was from 1916 until 1924, she also became national chairman of GCA's Visiting Gardens Committee, a position she held from 1919 to 1938. It was her theory that a lot could be learned by visiting gardens both in the U.S. and abroad. Her own gardens in Santa Barbara and in Millbrook were often open to the public. Mrs. Thorne ascended through the ranks of the Garden Club of America, becoming first vice president in 1932, at which time she was designated honorary vice president, a position she held until her death in 1952. She is the only person to be honored with this unique title. In 1917, during the First World War, a canning committee became active. The committee met in the kitchen of the Thorne Memorial High School. 3,410 jars of vegetables and fruits were canned in 20 working days. In 1919, soon after the war ended and to celebrate the peace, the club conceived the idea of a small park for the village, the Tribute Garden. There, a tree was planted for each person from the community who had served in the armed forces. The club assumed all the expenses of construction and provided a fund to guarantee future upkeep. This commitment continued until 1943, and the land for the garden was donated by Helen and Oakley Thorne. As of 1920, there were 64 members, including 13 men, the same basic number as we have today, but with fewer men. As I mentioned, we currently have 65 members. Of these, only 2 are men. In fact, we've had 1 or 2 men in the club for many years, and we currently have 2 men members. John Whitworth was a beloved member, and the Reverend Elliot Lindsley is now an honorary member. At a 1925 meeting, a member from Connecticut was elected, Mrs. Hatch of Cobble Pond Farm, currently the home of Kathy and Jay Metz. Kathy being a former president of the club and a dynamo force at the GCA level. A few years later, an amendment was passed allowing for members to live within a 40-mile radius of Millbrook. This provided us with the opportunity to have members from Connecticut, who now comprise about half of the membership, mostly from Sharon, Lakeville, and Salisbury. The 1930s were a time of great activity at the club, and the Depression is hardly mentioned in the archives. Perhaps this activity was a way for people to take their minds off what was happening on a larger stage. In the 30s, Mrs. Thorne traveled by train to attend the GCA's annual meeting in Seattle. It was on this trip that she described her ambitious plan to raise money for the purchase of 777 acres of redwood forest. She provided financial and organizational leadership to California's Save the Redwood League, and subsequently the first grove of preserved redwoods was dedicated to her. Also in the 1930s, the Millbrook Garden Club began to enter the International Flower Show, which had begun in 1914 and was held in New York's Grand Central Palace. I don't know where that is. Do you know where that is? I'd have to look that up. I've never even heard of it. It was sponsored by the New York Horticulture Society. Various awards were won by the Millbrook Garden Club over the next few years, but none compares to the one described in the archives. Mr. Joel Spingarn of Troutbeck received a special prize for his remarkable collection of clematis in full flower. 117 plants, comprising 62 varieties, were shown. The colors and forms were enchanting. Every plant was carefully labeled, and the usual varieties deserved hours of study. This is very impressive. I do not know how you could possibly grow over 100 varieties of clematis and then transport them down to New York City. But the logistics, I don't understand it. In 1935, the Millbrook Garden Club won first prize at the Dutchess County Fair for a wayside stand. The judges described it as a beautifully finished exhibit, stimulative and educational, and served to serve as an example for owners of wayside stands. It went on with additional medals and awards and was taken to Washington for the 75th anniversary of the Department of Agriculture. In 1937, Mrs. Renee DuPont Donaldson moved to Millbrook and designed her garden, Deep Hollow Farm, featuring a collection of native wild plants. Imagine, even in 1937, some people were seriously interested in native plants. Mrs. Donaldson gave many lectures encouraging others to use native plants in their gardens, including one lecture at Longwood, the home of her cousin, Henry DuPont. The MGC participated in the World's Fair in 1939. During the Second World War, the archives mentioned, "We miss our members from the Hudson River. So many others have limited their attendance at meetings in order to meet the gas ration coupons and to conserve their tires. There have been no flower shows, no visiting of distant gardens, but plenty of time to pull the weeds and pick vegetables. Perhaps because of this, some have learned to appreciate their gardens more." During this period, there were over 134 victory gardens planted in the tribute garden. I thought that was really fascinating. Another civic endeavor took place in '49. Mrs. Angela Place, former president of the Millbrook Garden Club and president of the Garden Club of America from 1947 to '50, had worked tirelessly on behalf of the National Arboretum. And in '49, she personally presented a check for $4,800 to President Truman for the purpose of planting evergreens in the National Arboretum. Actually, from reading the archives, I would say that everything Angela Place did, she did tirelessly. Quite something. The continuing concerns of the club have been enriched by various emphases. Children's gardening in the early days, vegetables and canning in wartime, the floral bounty of professional gardeners in the days of the big estates, slowly followed by members who enjoyed hands-on gardening. In recent decades, the club has focused more on flower shows, horticulture, and conservation. Now, here's the next 25 years, which is 50 years ago. In 1966, the club took over the maintenance and replanting of the Sharon Audubon Society's herb garden. Mrs. Clement Ford was a member of the club, and she and her husband donated the property to the National Audubon Society, which in turn named it the Sharon Audubon Society. This property has an herb garden that was designed and planted by the club's members and has been the primary civic project for the last years. It has been renovated several times. In 1968, Dig This, our newsletter, was first published and is now issued 4 times each year. In 1973, a significant civic project was accomplished with the efforts of Mrs. Scott Wheaton, aka Midge Morse, that being to eliminate the overhead wires along Franklin Avenue. She coordinated this effort with the Millbrook Village Board and Cary Arboretum. A garden and greenhouse was also started at Noble Horizons. And in 1988, the flower show was in the Thorne building, celebrating the bicentennial of the town of Washington. The first Garden History and Design meeting was held in 1996 with Corliss Eagle as speaker. Mrs. Eagle was the GCA's representative to the Smithsonian Institute. Several things came together at this meeting. It marked the beginning of the club's interest in photography, which today is a very strong focus. Thanks to the efforts of Kathy Delaceras, and largely as a result of that early lecture, members' gardens and other local gardens have been documented and photographed for the Smithsonian. Among these are the gardens of Ellen Peterson, Kathy Metz, Mrs. Oakley Thorne, Mrs. Herman Place, and Mrs. Donaldson. Recently, the garden of Douglas and Wilmer Thomas was documented, and 2 other club members' gardens are currently being documented. In the last 25 years, the Millbrook Garden Club has continued to distinguish itself on the national level. Several of its members are floral design and horticulture judges. Members have shown very impressive leadership in the GCA by serving as head of committees and also as senior officers of the GCA. The Visiting Gardens Committee is very active, and the club has taken wonderful garden tours to the Cotswolds, Newport, Brandywine, and throughout the Hudson Valley. A garden club talk would not be complete without a mention of the ribbons, blue ribbons. Generally speaking, members participate in the flower shows in a spirit of good fun, but there are some competitive moments. There are lots of opportunities to win medals, however, since there are so many courses to enter in horticulture, flower arranging, photography, and the creativity and talent of the members is truly remarkable. The Conservation Committee has continued to be a focus through its lectures and exhibits. The committee has had programs about mosquitoes and stagnant water, invasive plants, native plants, alternate sources of energy, the longhorned beetle, vernal ponds, endangered honeybees, hydrofracking, and the redwood forests. These programs have helped to educate us and enable us to educate others. The Conservation Committee was also on the mind of the Reverend Elliot Lindsay when he wrote an article for the GCA's December 2000 bulletin. It began with him asking his wife if she would like to visit the Dutchess County Recycling Center, and I quote, "I said to her, let us begin the new year by visiting the dump, my dear." She had better hopes to celebrate the millennium, but agreed to come. The issue of recycling is an area of growing interest for the club, and Lee Cornell has taken the lead in this area, and I'm afraid to say she has persuaded some of us to visit the local recycling center. One of the most successful and well-attended events was held at IES in 2005, when Frank Cabot, beloved founder of the Garden Conservancy, gave a lecture about his garden in Quebec. Open to the public, every seat was taken. The slides of his gardens are glorious. In 2013, in conjunction with the centennial celebration, Rita Warren, a member of the club and chairman of the GCA's Library Committee, organized a show of rare books of botanical art at the Grolier Club in New York City. It was titled Gardening by the Book, celebrating 100 years of the Garden Club of America. The volumes in the show were all from the GCA's rare books collection, dating from the early 17th century to the mid-20th century. The show was outstanding and warmly received and reviewed with a full-page article in the New York Times. The club raises money through its garden tours and its flower shows, and it makes donations and funds scholarships. Some of the recipients have been IES, Hudsonia, Housatonic Valley, Bard College, Cornell Cooperative, the Rail Trail in Millerton, the Sharon Audubon Society, and the GCA's intern programs. In celebrating the club's centennial, we donated a pair of gates at the entrance to the field where historic Twin Oaks stood in Sharon. The gates feature sculptures honoring the two fallen trees and were carved from the wood of the trees by sculptor Brenda Hall. As an aside, GCA's centennial project, in which Millbrook Garden Club participated, was to restore the entrance to the park, to Central Park at the 67th Street entrance on the east side. Also before the centennial, the Horticulture Committee worked with Broken Arrow Nursery in Connecticut to propagate the Cary maple, which was found on the grounds of IES, Cary. With IES's permission, we propagated the tree and raised about 20 little babies, 6 of which were auctioned last year at a fundraiser. 100 years yields many memories, and I have chosen some that I thought you might be interested in, related more to Millbrook than to Connecticut, but there are many others. We are so grateful for the intelligent, talented, and hardworking women and a few good men whom we have had as members over the years, and for the friendships that have developed. I had the pleasure of being president of the club when we had the centennial, and also, lucky for me, the GCA's centennial fell within that period. The club held a flower show early in my term, at which I told the members that I hoped that at the celebration of the club's bicentennial, future members of the Millbrook Garden Club would stop and think of us and what we had accomplished. Later in the year, at another event, I reminded everyone that I think it's important that we stop and think of the members who came before us. It is their path and leadership that has made the Millbrook Garden Club what it is today. And while the decades have each brought changes in society, the theme of the club has never varied. Horticulture, flower arranging, a strong emphasis on conservation, visiting gardens, an appreciation of the history of garden design, and a special focus on civic contribution. They set the pace for the club, and we have followed it. I'd like to leave you with one quote from Mrs. Donaldson. The development of a plant's life from seedling to flower to its climax of producing fruit and setting seed is a thrilling drama, where death and decay are not tragedies in a plant's world, but essential factors in the cycle of its life. So, when gardening, as each season brings the annual promise of eternal change, eternal developments, and eternal life, I am given a glimpse of infinity and am led to a perception of an awareness of the might, majesty, and glory of our Creator. Thank you. I just have one more thing. Be complete without. This is the invitation for the Connecticut Ramble biannual garden tour of the Millbrook Garden Club. It will be held on Friday, June 24th from 10 to 4. And if anyone is interested in going or receiving an invitation, if you let me know, I'll make sure you receive one. It is absolutely wonderful. And this year, there are 5 gardens in Connecticut that we're going to be visiting. Actually, we even though the tour is only each 2 years, so every 4 years we have gardens in the Hudson Valley, and the other time we have them in Connecticut. So this is Connecticut's turn. And one of the members designed this beautiful invitation.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are we taking questions?
Oh, sure.
Do you
I don't know if I know the answer to that.
do you work with the Garden Conservancy or?
It's a very good question. Half a dozen of the members open their homes to the Garden Conservancy on open days. In fact, Jean Goodwin is opening hers for the first time this coming Saturday, and that's wonderful. And usually Ellen Peterson and Nancy Eli, and sometimes Kathy Metz open theirs. Who else? I think that's it. And so we know them, we interact with them, but we don't know work with them.
Okay.
Oh, Zibby does too, Zibby Tozer. Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I have an answer to what you were asking about the Grand Central Exhibition Hall. It was at between 46th and 47th on Lexington Avenue, designed by Warren and Wetmore, opened in 1911. And according to Wikipedia, which is where I got all this information, it was New York's primary exhibition hall until 1953, which is when I guess the Coliseum opened. So it was built over the Metro North tracks.
Ginna, isn't there a plaque and a tribute garden under the walkway about the garden club and Mrs. Thorne?
Well, actually, as you enter the tribute garden on the right, there's a beautiful plaque.
Oh, plaque.
Anyone else?
I just want to say, I guess Walter's going to say the same thing. I beat him to it. The first meeting, it turns out, is our house.
Oh, is it your house? That's what I was wondering, because
East Winter.
I wanted to read off a million names to everyone, just because
I didn't
I
know
wouldn't
that
know them,
until
but
tonight.
a lot of people would know them, because we're newcomers, basically. But that was your house.
Well, I wasn't going to say that. I was just going to say, since this is all about the garden club, maybe those of us who knew her well, I mean, we tip our hats tonight to Martha and Helen, who was the gardener extraordinaire here in Millbrook, and of course Jay too, who was her right-hand man there. And very much missed, not just in the garden club, but in the broader community.
Oh, I agree.
So many people love
And her
her.
mother was, and her sister were members of other garden clubs, the GCA garden clubs. And Maris was a member for a few years. Yeah, I agree, I miss her too.
I'd like to say a few words. Number one, I came to Millbrook in 1933. And my dad was a tractor man. Mrs. Thorne was in the process of making that garden and doing all the work. Amazing thing is, all those trees that you see in front of the big house were all moved in from the Cardinal Hayes home, across in the wintertime, and planted in that front lawn. And it was in the late 30s, they had a garden show. And I remember Mr. Strobel, who was the garden superintendent, came, Johnny, we want you and Eddie to go through the garden and take all the dandelions out.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, we got the little shovel and the little basket, and we went all through the thing and took all those dandelions off. There wasn't too many, but we was always cutting dandelions off.
Striving
It
for
was a
perfection.
prize show all the time. And I remember coming out of the service in 1952. I had one of the soldiers that lived nearby, and I said, come on to the store and we'll walk through the garden. And I took a bunch of pictures at that time with him. And I would love to, and I say I got thousands and thousands of pictures and slides. And I would love to take those old pictures back in 1950 of the garden, which is absolutely priceless. And honest to God, and I hope someday that I'll be able to show them to think.
Okay.
Because we're talking about Mrs. Thorne here, and we never talk about how she was the president, wasn't she, for quite a few years?
Right, yeah, that's what he said.
And then when they had the big garden show, I can remember Laney Ross was the feature singer, and they had, must have been, had 500-600 people coming through to visit the garden, and that's why I say, I was one of the guys. Thank you very much.
I have some right now. I know Diana's going to speak, but if anyone wants to see more, hear more about the garden club after,
There's more, and do you have a sheet where people can sign up to get an invitation or whatever? Or-
yes.
Communicate that.
Yes, they do.
All right, what I'm going to do is talk, we've got something yet, sign up after, sign up here for the garden club tour. But I was gonna talk more about Helen Stafford Thorne and give some of her history. And anybody that knows me knows I love genealogy. So that's what I wanted to do, is find out what I could about her genealogy. And it was very interesting. I came out, the first thing I knew from our archives was finding that the date of her wedding. And then she was married in St. Louis. So, but didn't know much more than that. So I started looking online on Family Search, which is where I do most of my research, and found the census for starting with 1900 and going forward from there with her in Oakley. But she always listed her father as being born in England, her mother as being born in Louisiana. And I looked under St. Missouri, and I hadn't found anything prior to that for a Stafford. So when I saw that, I looked under in Louisiana and came up with a 1870 census, which lists her as 3 years old, which is just about what she'd be, because she was born in 1866. So by the time the census came around, she probably wasn't 4 yet. And with a father born in England and a mother in Louisiana. So I'm assuming that was her. So it's an assumption, but it lists an Isaiah Q.C. Stafford marrying or with a Margaret as the mother. And they were 37 and 35 at that point. But the amazing thing on that census, which I'll pass around when my daughter was able to bring it up online, is that, now we're talking about Louisiana 5 years after the Civil War. They have a property that is worth $500 where they live. He's a merchant and they have a property. The husband has, Isaac says his assets though are $7,250. But something I've never seen in a census before is her mother lists her assets as $10,000. And I've never seen a woman as a housekeep wife listing assets. So I'm going to pass this around. You can look at it and see. They're right toward the top. It's kind of small. But from there, I went back and looked up on Family Search, and I found the date of their wedding and found out the mother's name then. And she was a Margaret Smith. And they were married, where did I have it?
July 1862.
Yeah, it's up here. July 1862 in New Orleans. And so I had the name of her mother then, because it's listed on that as a Margaret Smith. But of course I couldn't find anything else. And when you look up a Margaret Smith, you're never going to find anything. I did find an Isaiah Stafford that immigrated from England in 1837 at the age of 8. But that's a little bit different dates, but makes him a little bit older than he said he was when he got married. But I don't know whether that's true. But trying to figure out what happened and how she ended up in St. Louis and got married, that was a bigger question. But according to John Foreman's book, which I went back and looked at on the houses, it says that she came up here for an extended house party at Barrycroft in Millbrook Estate, the estate of Captain R.S. Hayes, and that's who our library is named for. And so he was the former general manager of the Missouri Pacific Railroad. So that's a connection there. So we found that little one. So at first I thought maybe her father was connected with the railroad and that's how they met and that's why she ended up here. But anyway, that's where she met Oakley. And romance pursued from there. And from our archives, I learned that a St. Louis wedding, which attracted the attention of the New York Society, this is from the New York Times, of Miss Helen Stafford to Mr. Oakley Thorne. It was celebrated at Christ Church in St. Louis at 4 p.m. on the afternoon of February 26th. Well, then my daughter, taking that information, actually found a whole article of her wedding that was in the New York Times. It lists one of her bridesmaids as Miss Wing from Millbrook, but it lists that she was the niece and living with Dr. D.S.H. Smith of St. Louis and Mrs. Hoxie, her aunt. So we don't know what happened with her parents. We cannot find these two people in either the 1880 census or the 1900 census. So we've lost them completely there, but this is amazing. This tells all about her dress, exactly what it looked like, the flowers she carried, and everything else. All the news. There was 50 who gave her what, where she got, what she got from Oakley. She was wearing her necklace and pearls with the diamonds and a pink pearl and the fan from her aunt, and so it's really amazing. So that was a great find from my daughter, came up with that one. So we don't know where her interest in gardening came, but she did, John Foreman says that when she got here, that Oakley, according to family tradition, Oakley said, he gave her 1 man, 1 ox, and 1 plow. The rest was history. And that's when she transformed the garden. She started the transformation of the gardens. And after transforming the gardens, then she needed to transform the house. And they actually started the renovations of the house and went from there. Let's see. And then Thorndale was the host of annual meetings quite often for the Garden Club of America is what we have. And the presidents from many of the different states came here for their for the meetings. And in 1929, the Garden Club of America, including 90 members, went to England to tour the gardens there. And she, on the immigration records, she did go and come back into New York at that point. But in 1929, she also has an immigration in Hawaii and another one in San Francisco. So they may have gone around. That was 1929. And in 1935, the Garden Club of America made a trip to Japan, China, and Honolulu. And we have this book in the archives.
What year? What year?
1935. This is an original by Maria M. Davis. I understand that the Smithsonian is very envious that we have this. We have 2 copies. So we haven't decided what we're doing, but
What's the name of that? What is it?
the report of a visit to of the Garden Clubs of America to Honolulu, Japan, and China.
So the Millbrook Historical Society has 2 copies of that?
In our archives, yes. This is one.
Like each member had one?
I have no idea. But in it, she's 114 were on the ship that went on this tour. Only 2 passengers were not Garden Club, members of the Garden Club party. And officially there were 93 delegates, 12 husbands, 5 daughters, 1 son, and 6 maids. This is all a quote. And 1 woman was taking her valet, which caused much amusement. There's also a book there in our archives that tells about the Jekyll Island Club members, and they're in there. And as you know, in 1919, right after World War I, the American Legion Post 260 was formed here in Millbrook, and that actually became the Parker Haight Post 260, which just disbanded recently and joined the Pleasant Valley Club. But at that time, that's when they donated the 6 acres of land to the Garden Club, or to the Millbrook Garden Club. And the Millbrook Garden Club actually held the deed for the tribute garden. The tribute garden was an everlasting memory for the soldiers and sailors from the town of Washington. And on October 24th, 1920, a tree was planted for each of those who served, and the original landscape was done by the Garden Club that year. There's a plaque that up in the garden that gives where every tree is and who it's for. And that's up in the upper left-hand side. And the playground was at the same time because that's what the men were fighting for, the freedom of the children to play. And that's why the playground is up there. And in 1924, the children planted wildflowers all around the garden. And there's a list over there of what children planted, what flowers we have. So that's really interesting. And that's something that, it would really be good to see if we could do again. And have more of the children doing something like that up there and owning it as their own too. And then, let's see, and in 1943, at the request of the Garden Club, the garden was taken over by the Millbrook Tribute Garden, and the foundation was formed at that point. And Oakley Thorne, Helen S. Thorne, George T. Whalen Sr., and Paul Haight were the original officers for that. And over the years, the Tribute Garden has received many awards, and the most recent was the Federated Garden Clubs from New York State in March of 2003 for excellence in landscaping and maintenance. So, any questions? Yes?
Did you ever find out where her mother was from in Louisiana?
New Orleans. They were in New Orleans, that's all I know. But no, I couldn't find a Margaret Smith anywhere. I mean, I found so many that I couldn't differentiate which one. It's too common a name. And once I had her uncle's name, I tried to look him up, but nothing came up for him either. Because it's just initials, D.S.H. Smith. He's a doctor. He's Dr. D.S.H. Smith, so that's it.
I'd like to add something to that. When I was going to school, I'll never forget it, I was about in third grade. And the garden club came, and they had flower seeds for us to get involved planting flowers. We had to have a 10 by 10 spotted red, and we planted the flowers. I think there was 15 or 20 different seeds that were planted, and I was involved in that. My father piled it all up and got it all started, and then I weeded. But anyway, I won first prize for the best garden. But I will add one second thing. Number one, I happened to go through the Thorndale barns one day with Mr. Strobel, the garden superintendent. And here are all these garden tubs that were all piled up in the bark of the barn. I said, what are you doing with those? No, that was from the flower show when we had the show many years ago. Well, my God, why can't we take them out and put them on the street? And I remember going to Mrs. Thorne, or he went to Mrs. Thorne, can you donate those to the village? Sure. And who came along but the Millbrook Golf Garden Show? Came and planted all the geraniums and everything else. And thank God that's still going on today.
Do it tomorrow.
But those girls were all in there doing nothing. But we had them.
And here's pictures of what the Tribute Garden looked like in 1919.
Oh, my.
These are original pictures.
Go ahead. Did you say one man, one horse, one plow?
Ox.
One ox.
One ox.
And that was, what was the context of that?
That's what John Foreman said, the Thorne family tradition said, that when she wanted to garden, that's what her husband gave her to do it with.
A starter kit.
That was her starter kit. Yes.
I'm Helen, Joe, and John's sister, so Thorndale. I was married in 1954. Before I got married, I went down to the Thorndale Gardens and had my photographer take all these pictures. I'll pass it around if you want to see them.
That's pictures of the gardens. Yes.
I'm Henry. I'm John's little brother, Hal's little brother. I will tell you a funny story. John, he gets so serious. Go with a German gardener down there many years ago. Somebody ordered, they were supposed to order daffodil seeds. Forget-me-not seeds, that's a little bitty blue flowers. Got 50 pounds of it came in. Strobel said, oh gosh, who did this mistake? What are we going to do with 50 pounds of this stuff? So when he got a bright idea, that stream that goes up towards Bennett College, you know, it crosses 44, then it goes on down through, all through Thorndale. Well, halfway up there, there's a dam there. He took that 50 pounds of bag of forget-me-not seeds and dumped it right there on that dam. Those seeds went down, and today, if you go down through Thorndale, starting from Bennett, go down that stream, which it goes all the way to Washington Hollow and ends up down in Wabash Creek. But not quite to Wabash Creek, but almost down to Washington Hollow, that whole stream, you'll see on the edges is the forget-me-not. That was planted probably 100 years ago when that happened, when he did that.
Now that's local.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
all of you, for coming. There's refreshments back there at the table, and please take advantage of looking at the displays and sign up if you are interested in going to the garden.
Good job.